Hello, everyone. I'm Alan Furstenberg.
And I'm Mark Tucker,
We are Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs.
How's it been going, Mark?
It's been good. It's been a good busy week. Lots of things going on. How about you?
Busy. Busy is a good way to put it. It was kind of interesting. I noticed last week, Jovo. I think it literally was the day that we released the last video we did. They announced something that was kind of right in line with what we were talking about debugging and tracing and seeing what you were doing where and trying to figure things out. So, and then I saw over the weekend, it looked like you were playing with it a bit.
Yeah, I was. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that and kind of analytics in general. We did, when we talked about the debugging stuff last episode, one of the things that we mentioned was CloudWatch logs, and those are nice. Some type of logging of your console logs and stuff. And part of that, I do request and response so that I can see what the JSON was coming in or out. Do you do the same thing, Ellen?
I do similar. One of the things that's nice about the way Google Cloud Logging works is that it ends up logging them as objects.
Okay.
So I can save them as objects, and I kind of mentioned this a little, that the way I save things to Google Cloud Logs was as objects, so you can then do queries on those objects later. And then copy them over to Bigtable, where you can do some analytics on it even. One of the nice things about Bigtable is that it does have a lot of analytics tools tied to it.
Yep.
So
you can, the fact that you have access to the data kind of in your own data store is a plus, I would think.
It's certainly got advantages to it, but at the same time, it also, and it's great for doing things like when someone says, hey, I tried doing this and it didn't work. I can say, well, okay, let me figure out who you are and go back and look at what happened and what the data I thought was going on at the time was, and how it matches what they thought was going on at the time. So those sorts of things are always nice.
Yeah.
But it's still tricky. It's still
it is tricky because you have to kind of go through a number of different steps. And so besides writing things to CloudWatch, since most of the code that I run is running in Lambda, and that's just the easy way to do that. I have used some analytics tools. There's built-in analytics that both Google and Alexa give you, and in the end, it's all based off of the request and the response object. There, in the case of Amazon, there probably are some things that you don't, as a developer, have access to that they give you analytics on, like number of bargains and
oh, that's interesting.
Different things like that, which is they've just started doing this last year. And then, so I've also in the past used Dashbot as an analytics, and they give you some of the same tools that Alexa gives you on its analytics. But one of the things that they have that I've liked is something called the fire hose. And what it does is it actually groups people together, their requests and responses together into sessions. So you can actually see a trace that the person says this, asks this and says this, or at least asks for this intent on the Alexa side of things. And this is the intent that was found and the response that came back, even to the level of being able to show some images. Back at the time when I was doing this, it was display template stuff, but APL is out now on the Alexa side of things. And so it would be interesting to kind of trace a user's session from beginning to end.
Yeah.
Because CloudWatch is good to a certain extent, but you've got everybody's, if you got
everybody's stuff mixed in there, right?
Yeah, they're all conglomerated, and if you can split people out and say, oh, this person, this is the session, and then later on they did a session. There were some other tools that I had looked at that did that too. That I found that very helpful, but there is a limitation with the free version of Dashbot where you don't get access to, you only get so many of those fire hose logs.
One of the things I like the most about Dashbot was that they have a kind of path flow tool. If you're familiar with analytics on, well, if you're familiar, for example, with Google Analytics for the web, it shows you things like, here were your entry pages. Here were the pages where people entered. And then from, 50% of the people hit this page to start.
Right.
And of those, 50% went to this page and 25% went to this page. And, so you kind of see how over time it filters down and how, where people end up over time. So after, they've been on your site for like 4 clicks, where do they end up? What are your popular pages at that time? And Dashbot provided the same sort of thing, where you could see it going from intent to intent to intent.
Right.
Which intents get triggered the most often after this one. And that's really useful if you're looking to see how a conversation flows. Does it actually match the way you thought a conversation was supposed to flow?
Or if you see that there's particular intents where there's a high percentage of people that end the session at that point, then you start to wonder, okay, what can I do? Is that a natural place for people to end? Is that okay in this situation? Or is there something that I could do to better?
Why are they giving up here? Or do I have an error here? Or,
exactly.
It lets you start asking those questions and asking them intelligently instead of, people just going, oh, I don't know, we got people visiting the site. That's good enough.
So this fits right along the lines of what Jovo's doing with something that they call Jovo Inbox.
Okay, so you had a chance to play with it, I understand.
I did.
So I'm curious to hear more about it.
All right, so I read through the documentation and I did some implementation stuff. So I think to get access to the code, you need to be a contributor to Jovo. It's kind of like an early access contributor only perk at this point. But there's 3 main parts. The part in the middle is some sort of a database. I think they're suggesting MySQL as a database. And what happens is there's a plugin for Jovo, which as you're doing your intents and with its requests and responses, then it's behind the scenes sending that information to that database. Then there is a separate website.
So hang on. So every time it hits the Jovo, it hits the Jovo fulfillment code, there's something that gets logged to the database. Is that how it works?
So for every request response.
Okay. Okay.
So it tracks like what session you're in, what user you are, and all the stuff that you get as part of that payload, the request and response payload. So those are being logged. So similar to what CloudWatch or Dashbot is doing, it's just intercepting those, and it's sending them off to a database. So then there's a website that you can that they've got created that you start up, and it reads the database, and you can do things like get a list of all the different users that are in your system, and you could even decide if you want to add a friendly name to some of the people that you know in there. And there's some filtering that you can do on the plugin side, so certain users don't go in there, or I don't know, there's things like, because some of the stuff like sometimes like you're debugging and you get this Jovo debugger user and you don't necessarily want to be logging them. So there are some controls. It's fairly light at the beginning, right now, starting out, but logs it to the database, and then you start up this website and you can look at the different users, and when you get on a user, you can see their different sessions. And then you can open up a session and you can see the path that this is the intent that they said, and this is the response that come back. And you can then look in either and get the whole request JSON or response JSON, or render APL for that page. So it's pretty basic right now, but I like where they're going, especially the fact that that you're in control of the data. So you can decide if you want to keep things long term.
So so when you say it's a database, it's your database.
You stand up your own MySQL database.
Oh, and it's your website.
Yeah, and they have code that points to that. Yeah, so you could host that website yourself or just like run it locally.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So it's kind of the advantages of what a Dashbot would give you. In some cases, Dashbot does a whole lot more at this point.
But it's all local.
But it's all local. You get the database and you get access to it, which means that you could modify it and get other information. So for example, something that's always interested me is like for a particular user, how many different devices are they using my skill with? Because that information is there's a unique device ID that goes, and there's a little bit of information about the device, like the screen resolution and things like that. So then you can start to say,
on the Alexa side, and we'll talk about some of this in another show, I have a feeling, because I know you don't get that on the Google side.
No, you don't.
You don't get a different device ID either.
Yeah. So there's going to be some differences between it, but I guess it is also cross-platform. You could have multiple streams. Like for Snatchword, I could have my Bixby and my Google Assistant and my Alexa apps all going to the same database. So I'd have to figure out, I guess, on filtering and things like that. But yeah, I guess it really does depend. But on the Alexa side, it would be nice to say, oh, this user, they've used 3 different devices, and they have like a screen device and two dots, or something like that, or 2 non-screen devices.
But
I don't know.
It also makes it interesting that one of the things since the data is in there, I could easily see being able to do cross-device retention comparisons, for example.
Yeah.
So you could see that 20% of your Alexa users return after 1 week, but only 15% of your Google users return.
Exactly.
And is that because there's a problem on the Google side, or it's just the nature of the people using a device, or they're using different kinds of devices, and that might be influencing why they're returning or not? So even if Inbox doesn't do that now, the data is there, and you can do that data mining later.
Yeah, and that's where I think that the important part is that, what I was wanting to do is just get it going and collecting data, and not worry about it. In some cases it's helpful if I debug a situation. It's like somebody says, "Oh, I had a problem hitting this yesterday about this time." I could go and try to find it. Even if I initially found the person in CloudWatch, then I could go into this other tool and I could see the trace of their whole conversation and where they got to. When an Alexa skill has an error, then it gets the end and intent type, or on session end or something. But it also gives you like a reason of why there was an error. I could see something that Jovo Inbox would add would be a separate inbox for just those sessions that had errors. So then you could go in and like, oh, there was an error in this session. Let's see what happened in this session. And then you could start thinking, whatever, all the different information that you're getting, you could start to pull that out. Since you have a database, you could do your own queries against it. You could put it into some other tool to do more advanced queries. There's all kinds of things that leads you to do, because you own the data.
The you own the data part, I think, is probably one of the biggest bits of this that makes it so different from what else is there. I mean, in some ways it's very similar to what we can do with Google Cloud Logging and Google Bigtable, but that's a database in the cloud that you don't necessarily have control over. Here, it's you configure that database however you want. You keep the retention policy that you want. It's totally yours, and I think that's a big difference. Now, but that does raise a question. when I read the material for Inbox, it mostly made it sound like it was meant as a debugging tool, so that the kind of intent was your alpha testers, your beta testers would, you would attach it to those, but it didn't necessarily mean that it would be something in production. And by that, my takeaway for that was that makes it sound like it slows things down dramatically. How much of a performance hit did it seem to do for you?
Well, I didn't get it all the way installed.
Okay.
So a number of tasks I had this weekend, and this was one of the ones. Spent a good few hours going through getting a MySQL database set up in Amazon RDS, which is something I hadn't done before, and that requires security groups and VPCs and stuff, which isn't something that I've spent a lot of time or have had to spend a lot of time on in the past. And so first time it didn't work, wasn't accessible, realized that there's a little setting that says that you have to make it public. Otherwise it's a private database. And so I made it public and it still didn't work. And so then I kind of blew that database away and created a brand new one, selecting a brand new security group and a brand new everything.
Usually that's been my experience with RDS, is that when it doesn't work, it's easiest to just start over.
Yeah.
And the trick I always find is making sure it's in the same permission group as whatever my Lambda needs to be.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I got that installed, and then went through and built the code and did all the stuff that I needed to, and downloaded a tool. So as part of Visual Studio Code, where I could query the database, and
Nice.
That's where I was figuring out I wasn't getting connectivity. And so I solved the connectivity problem, and then I ran the code locally, and I got an error, and it turns out that that you have to create a database. There wasn't any particular scripts. I guess it uses an ORM behind the scenes. So all I needed was an empty database, but the documentation was light on that area. And so I did that, and I still ran it locally, things proxied locally through the Jovo CLI proxy. And I was able to start getting some things logged to it, and I could bring up the website and see the things that were logged into it. And then I deployed it to Lambda, and my Lambdas are timing out at 7 seconds. So it's something's not happening, some connectivity maybe, I don't know, with the Lambda. So it sounds like maybe a permission thing with the Lambda and the
Lambda's timing out before you get a response, I assume.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I was. I got stuck, and I had pushed some code out there on Saturday. So Snatchword was actually broken for a couple of hours on Saturday. Which is when I discovered the nice little health check where it realizes that your Google action is down for a while, and so when you ask for it, it says that it's not available. But then it's nice enough once things are repaired and going, pinging again, that then you after a little while your action starts working again.
The health check ping is interesting, and that's also reflected in the analytics that Google gives you. It shows you when, you can see nice charts of, boom, off the bottom.
So overall, it was a good experience. I didn't get everything done on my list, but I learned a lot, and learned some things I didn't expect to learn with the.
I'm really curious. The performance is obviously an important consideration. I think. I'm hoping they did it in a way that logging doesn't incur a performance hit.
Yeah.
At least not a significant one. I know the way that I tend to do this sort of stuff in multivocal is to do it after I return the reply, so that it doesn't take up any of the precious 5 or 7 seconds that we have to reply. And it's just taking up CPU time, which, okay, I'm billed for, but at least my response time is fast.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting because I haven't dove into the code. It's available for me to look at. And so I don't know if they're simply just writing to the database, but there are a number of things that you could do. Like you could be sending it to something like Event Bridge or some sort of a queue, so that you do get that quick response back, and it just logs it later.
Well, the problem is if they've done it in a platform independent way, and I assume they have,
Yeah.
then you don't have Event Bridge because you don't have Event Bridge everywhere. You know, so the only thing they can count on is a database of some sort.
Yeah, but so I guess I'm not 100% sure if the code that's in my Jovo voice app, if that is writing directly to the database, or if it's writing to some Jovo API, which is then in turn writing to your database.
But that Jovo API would have to be local still somewhere. So it could be the same thing that the web console that you have, it could be part of the web console, which is running somewhere. And that would make sense in some ways to have it as a separate task. It's just, it still boils down to somewhere something's going to take time. And the question is what and where.
That's true. And we've been able to do, logging to CloudWatch or logging to, or, analytics to Dashbot or other things, and having that be performant enough that it doesn't, affect. So there are ways to, it's not an unsolvable problem.
No, it's
just,
not.
I wonder if how they've done that. It's kind of interesting. Like you say, is this tool going to be more for the, the beta pre-release, or are they, I see a great value of having it be in production.
I think it's tremendously valuable in production.
When it gets to that point, yeah.
But, if you think of handling thousands of users at a time and being able to record all of that, you start to worry about performance. I know, and part of the reason I raise this is the first time I tried Dashbot, I had a similar problem to you. I, was logging things to Dashbot, and suddenly the service that I was using, the cloud function that I was running, stopped responding. And it turned out I had configured Dashbot with the wrong URL, so it was hanging on connecting there and sending it the data. But that quickly made me realize that I now had a remote service that I wasn't, that I was depending on, but that wasn't actually involved in getting a response. It didn't need this. I needed this, but the person who was, the user didn't need this. So that quickly made me realize we need to make sure when we do these things that we're doing them in a way that it doesn't impact user experience.
Yeah, exactly. And if there is a if there is a connectivity problem, that it should be able to just move on, and just ignore it and keep going. Log it someplace else, or let it notify in some other way so that we know that this thing's not working.
Right.
But it shouldn't it should never cause the voice code to fail. Yeah.
And I mean, and we see this sort of, the equivalent on the web is that stuff shows up in the error console, in the JavaScript console.
Yeah.
And things behave a little weird and slow. But slow in voice is fatal.
Yes, it is. Exactly.
And that's, I think that's one of the things that as we try to figure out what voice development looks like, we now have to handle the fact that, 5 seconds is slow.
Yeah, it is.
A 5-second response is slow. And it really, really matters. And, anything worse than that it's fatal. It really is.
Which is, is interesting, because I've hit situations where that you're going against something and you're like, oh, I need to make this API call to get a token so that I can then make this API call, which gives me back some of the information, which then I need to go through and then, maybe iterate through and then make another call or make multiple calls to get the detail for the 5 things that I want, and pretty soon you're like, that 5 seconds is gone with API calls. And so that then you start thinking about, well,
how can I improve this? What do I really need here?
Yeah, in this case, REST being, and I'm not saying I'm anti-REST by any means, because a lot of the APIs that I use are REST and they're perfectly fine. But then you start thinking about, for this certain thing that I need to do, then I can't, I can't just like get the list and then show the list to the user, and then when the user clicks the item, then get the details,
Yeah.
And what you might need out of the details, might not be on the list part, and so then you're like, you're just making a ton of different API calls.
We're going to need to talk about performance another time. I think that's another show. That'll be another show for another time. But I think in this context, it's important to realize that all the logging that we want to do, it has a cost, and we can't ignore that cost.
Yeah, and then you start to also think, because like, how many things do I have that are logging my request and my response, right?
Yeah.
So I've got CloudWatch that's doing it. I've got Dashbot that's doing it. Maybe I've got Jovo Inbox that's doing it. In other cases, I've had other things that would be logging things like campaigns, and there's a number of different other logging things that type things or analytics or other things that you can't do all of those. And so then you start thinking, well, what would be a better approach to that? Is there a way that you can then log to some sort of a separate server or a queue that then picks up the things and then makes the different calls? Mm-hmm. And so then you start thinking about enterprise solutions like EventBridge or queuing technologies or something.
Well, and even things like Inbox end up being part of that solution, or what I was doing with logging with multivocal to cloud logs, and that's you collect all the information over the entire session and you log it once.
Yeah.
And then you figure out what to do with that log later, because hopefully what you've captured is a relatively complete representation of what you need. And if it is, that's great. You can go and analyze it later. And if it's not, you need to fix that.
Yeah.
But and I think that's certainly the way that I think we're going to need to increasingly approach doing analytics and logging and tracing and
right.
When it comes to voice, is that we're not going to be able to handle it live because we need to respond too quickly. So we'll build those services, and Inbox I think is one example of a service like that.
Yeah.
Dashbot's another example where we'll be able to do that eventually.
Yeah, so I could think of I could, I guess, conceptually visualize this tool where it was like Inbox that you were to log things to, but then Inbox has plugins. So then you say, oh, I want to take it from here and send that to Dashbot, or I want to send that to CloudWatch, or I want to send that to, or something like that, where then you can start configuring all the different places that you want things logged to, but it's really only going to be one call from your code to say, here's the request, here's the response, and then let everything else happen after that.
The downside to that, of course, is that now you are depending on one service to not break.
Yes.
But again, if hopefully you built it in a way that when you do send it there, it either fails or succeeds. And if it fails quickly. Yeah. Because that, more than anything else, that's the most important part. If it fails, it needs to fail quickly, which is in some ways a really strange thought process behind that.
If you're going to fail, just get it over with already.
Yeah.
Keep trying over and over again.
But in terms of the speed, it makes me think, going back to analytics and speed and so forth, I know one of the things that's really nice about Google's console is that it does give you the response time, the average response times for calls to webhooks. So you know how long each response ends up taking. And you can see, hey, when I test this at home, it only takes, 100 milliseconds. And when I deploy it, it takes 4,000 milliseconds. What's going on there?
What's up with that? Exactly.
So that's one of the nice charts that I know Google gives you. Does Amazon give you something similar?
Yeah. So I included one of the charts that I had for when things were down, so I could see if it was an error was up or down, and you could see even in vocations, and so you could see every, like, I don't know, 6 minutes, 7 minutes, whatever it is, bip, help check, help check, help check, help check, right? So, but yeah, it shows you, average milliseconds for your Lambda function and stuff. And then even if you go into the analytics for Alexa, then you can start seeing there's some ranges as far as, average response time back and success rates and things like that. So you can start to see how performant your input endpoint's going, is behaving, and kind of where that's going over time.
Yeah, no, originally when Google launched the analytics for Assistant, they were really weak. Yeah. And they've gotten better over time. They're now reporting cohort return rate, so how many people from 2 weeks ago have returned this week, how many people from 1 week ago have returned this week, performance of the action itself, different ways that the action is invoked. Was it invoked by direct invocation? Was it invoked from an assistant link? So lots of other interesting bits that it reports on now.
Yeah, no, that's something that has improved over time, and I know that this analytics that are specific for chatbots and voice has been a tough area. You'd think that it would be a tool that everybody would use and be successful and be able to pay for, but that's been a challenge, and that's kind of one of the things that I've been watching. Such a necessary tool as analytics, and just how hard of a go it's been for companies that have tried that out over the years.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Dashbot has produced some great stuff, and yet it doesn't seem to be used a lot. I don't hear a lot of people talking about using it and the benefits that you can get out of it. And Google Analytics, although it's been finely tuned for both mobile and web, hasn't really adapted itself to voice yet.
I've seen people who have taken the logging events for pages and say, okay, this a page is an intent, and then trying to use logging with Google Assistant, with Google Actions, Google Analytics links. But yeah, there's definitely some. They've made improvements over time, and I think that's invaluable in insights that you can get from analytics. But I guess I just want more. I want more information.
I think this is certainly an area where there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. But I think we've got some good steps. I think Jovo Inbox is another good step, but it's clear that we've got a long way to go to really understand what we need.
Yeah, I would like to get to a point where you're using a voice skill, and there's like a skill or action, you've got some issue, and they're like, hey, would you like to notify us of an issue that you're having, or something like that, right? And then now what user and what session that is, and you can go right to looking up that information and track things down, or maybe even ask a couple of questions while they're while the user's still there in the moment. It's difficult because in some cases the action or skill just crashes, and so then you have no interaction at all. But what if there was some first party experience where it would jump in and then allow you to collect some information and send it off?
I think this one also we need to table for another time and discuss. Well, in the broad context of what things do we need a voice operating system to handle for us?
Yeah.
And I think you and I could come up with a good long list of that. And this sounds like it would be included in that.
Yeah, I think so too. How can you better pass off to a voice app and recover from a voice app, either success or fail? And what might you do, and still without overwhelming the user with bombarding them with 10 questions or whatever. But if there's something you could do that would,
what's the better user experience than the audio blue screen of death?
Exactly. I like that. That's, that's exactly what it is.
That's what we're aspiring to, yeah. So if you've got thoughts about Jovo Inbox or what sorts of analytics you're looking to do or how you do debugging, we would love to hear your thoughts on this. Or if you've got thoughts about what a voice OS needs to provide, we'd love to incorporate that for a future show.
Yes, thank you very much for listening or watching, and we just appreciate any feedback that you can give us on what you want to hear, or just carry on this conversation. There's also, have we talked about Voice Lunch Dev?
That's
yet?
right. No, we have not. So launching almost immediately after this video gets released will be the brand new Voice Lunch Dev.
So it should be, I think it's every 2 weeks on a Thursday. And it's global, but it's focused on developers. So if we felt like sometimes we were taking over Voice Lunch with, getting down into the depths of code and talking different, algorithms or tools or frameworks or different things like that, then this is all about that. You can come in and don't matter if you're starting or something new, or you've been doing this for a while. We're just welcome. Come in and glean what you can. Jump in on the conversation. Volunteer to present on a topic, or just let's learn together on.
Let's learn together. I think the big point is that we're going to be working with other developers. So it's a bunch of us, all of whom are trying to figure out how to take these great ideas that we have and actually implement them. So you're with other people who have been down the same road, who are having the same problems you are, who are talking about the same topics that we're here talking about every week, except you get to be right there, right in the conversation.
Yeah, I suspect in some cases it might be, hey, I've got this problem. Has anybody, have a solution for that? But then it's also going to be, hey, this is something, brand new that I'm trying out on a code perspective, or, and I don't think it's necessarily even limited to if you're doing JavaScript or Java or Go or,
no, it's
.NET or whatever you're doing, you're welcome.
Yeah, no, everybody who is doing voice development, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love you to share what you're doing. We want to have these conversations with you. The Voice Lunch community is a fantastic community, and you are welcome as part of it.
So great. So now maybe we'll get some more people, joining Voice Lunch Dev.
We're looking forward to it.
Yeah. So thank you very much for listening. As I was saying before, and we appreciate you. Let's go code some voice apps.
Take care, everyone. We are Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, Mark.